So joining me now is moderator Dr. Sarah Saska, Anisha, Steve, Zoe, Kristina, and Eva. Come on out.
But the moderators should go last, right? Go ahead. Awesome. Hello everyone. So we're here to follow up on the panel that happened a little earlier today, right? Folks were chatting about what does it look like to really build an intentional recruitment strategy around women in tech. And so now we're going to chat about what does it look like to actually retain those folks. So my name is Dr. Sarah Saska, and I'm the CEO of Feminunity. So I have the privilege of working with so many thoughtful CEOs, leaders who really understand that they need to be intentional about their recruitment strategies, right? That they want people who look, feel, and think differently than they do within their organization across all departments and all levels. But what we're not seeing so much great work around is building a culture of inclusion where people can really thrive and feel a deep sense of belonging, right? This culture piece is a lot more difficult to sort of figure out. So what I'd like to do is chat with this really dynamic group of folks. We have researchers, leaders, folks, startup culture, and corporate players. So a few different perspectives here, and they're going to chat with us a little bit about what retention really looks like within their organization. So first, I'd love for everyone to sort of quickly introduce themselves, your name and your role, and then we'll get started.
I'm going to start. So Steve Irvine, I'm the founder and CEO of artificial intelligence software company called integrate.ai here in the city.
Hi, I'm Zoe Jones. I'm from Dallas, Texas, and I'm a software engineer with Cognizant Technologies.
Great, I'm Kristina Cleary, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at a company called Ceridian. We're a global human capital management company, and our flagship product is called Dayforce, and that product manages everything from payroll to HR, workforce management, and talent management. Woo, thank you. Got a few people here today.
My name's Anisha. I'm a research fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School at the Women in Public Policy program. We're a small research center at Harvard, focusing on closing gender gaps in the fields of economic opportunity, politics, health, and education. And recently, we've been focusing on our gender and tech research portfolio, which is the portfolio that I lead, really focusing on debiasing organizations, so looking at structures and processes and figuring out within the tech sector how we can debias the industry, but also how can we leverage technology to bring behavioral insights to scale across different sectors. So really excited to be here.
One of the co-founders and the chief operating officer at Borrowell. We're a financial technology company. It's based here in Toronto. We were the first company to give credit scores out for free in Canada, and our mission is to empower people to make great decisions about credit. Amazing. Thank you, everyone. So the first question that I want to sort of pose to the group, and I'd love to start with Anisha. Can you tell us, what's really working in terms of retention around women in tech? And how do we think about something like intersectionality as we do that? What's the data showing? Where's it at?
Yeah, so at the Women in Public Policy program, we don't really focus on best practices, as we've heard throughout the day. What might work at Google might not work at Facebook, et cetera. So we really focus on best evidence. So what is out there to really close these gaps in terms of the tech sector and also across different sectors for women? I think in terms of when you're thinking about diversity and inclusion at organizations, it should really be embedded into the fabric of your institution, in the fabric of your organization, rather than being like a one-off D&I section where they focus on data or whatever. It really has to be from the top down. So you really have to have engaged leaders and engaged folks in the sphere to really figure out best evidence and best practices for what works in your organization specifically. But I think from a bigger lens, there are three areas in which we have conducted research to look at retention. The first area is talent management, a little bit of what we heard about this morning in terms of hiring, but also promotion and performance evaluations, et cetera. The other area is organizational policies, issues like pay equity, flexible leave, parental leave, And also the issue of culture and inclusion, which Sarah talked about a little bit earlier, in terms of microaggressions, micro-sponsorship, how can people bring their full selves to work every day. And I think I'm just going to focus on one quick example due to time. I'm going to focus on the issue of performance evaluations, which I think is a fascinating process because it is so subjective. Like, performance evaluations in general are really subjective, and they are actually the ways in which most organizations figure out who gets promoted and who doesn't, or who is suggested for promotion. So some research out of the Harvard Law School looked at what is the gender gap in performance evaluations, and they looked at specifically women actually get more subjective feedback than men do, and they get less constructively critical feedback. So in terms of the difference between that, more subjective critical feedback is saying something like, Sarah, your work in sales needs improvement, versus something like, Sarah, your work in sales needs improvement. Here are some professional development tips, or come talk to me. We can really talk about this. I've seen this issue specifically with clients X and Y. So really focusing on the person's growth rather than their issues at the workplace. So that's just kind of an example of how performance evaluations are biased, and in terms of figuring out what works. Really quickly, I think organizations have found that having a multitude of different people giving you feedback, so it's not just supervisor to employee, it's clients giving feedback, it's colleagues giving feedback, and also increasing the frequency of reviews. So some organizations do it on a weekly basis or even a monthly basis and automate it, so making it easier for organizations to de-bias this process will actually lead to increase women at senior leadership positions at organizations.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for laying the groundwork for us with the research. So there's some good tactical stuff, huh? So I'm wondering if folks, the rest of the crew, with what's going on within your organization that you've seen sort of work in this regard. What have you, tried or failed at?
Sure. Do you want me to go first? Okay. So one of the things that we really focus on at Ceridian is how to create an ideal workplace. We all recognize that the world of work is changing and organizations need to change. And when we look at creating an environment where people of all genders can be successful, we focus on really 3 key things. And one thing that I've noticed today as well as yesterday, we're talking about actions we can take, whether they be big or small. And the 3 areas we focus on are 1, policies and programs. And when you look at policies and programs, it's not just HR policies. Like Damien mentioned, you have to look at unconventional and non-traditional policies. So this year we implemented something called Take 2, where people can take 2 hours out of their workday to do anything that they need to do. For example, taking an aging parent to an appointment, picking up a child from a hockey practice, et cetera, which really encourages that workplace flexibility. The second one would be tools and technology. And really providing your people with the tools and technology so that they can do their work from wherever they need to be, whenever they need to be. And this is really critical, especially for working parents. If I didn't have access to email at a hockey rink, I would really be in the situation where I'd have to choose if this was a position that I could actually handle along with being a working mom. And for me, it's not a choice. I want to be a working mom and I want to be a working professional. And finally, 3 would be cultures and values. And the policies and programs and the tools and technology are great, but without an inclusive culture and values that support that culture, they're very, very meaningless.
Yeah, so one thing I'll say, Borrowell is a much smaller company than Ceridian. And I've said before that if you want to hire women, sort of on like the recruiting side, then hire women. And I would say the same thing in terms of like retaining women. If you want to retain more women, then hire more women. And it sounds a little bit facetious or flippant, but it's not. I think if you have a lot of women who are in the workplace, I think there is a greater understanding of the roles and responsibilities and the experiences that women face. And so if your manager is a woman, and it's likely that she will have a better understanding. And I think this is where intersectionality really comes into play as well, is I know that I know my own experience, but that doesn't mean that I understand the experience of other underrepresented groups. So at Borrowell, we've worked really hard on diversity. We have 40% of our developers who are women, 45% of our team overall is women, and 50% of our management team. But that is just a first step, and I think as we sort of look at retaining women, the first step is to have a lot of women so that I think people feel like there's other people who understand what they're going through. But I think on the intersectionality piece, there's still a lot. I think it can be easy for me to say, well, I'm a woman of color, I'm a female founder, so I understand everyone's perspective, and I really appreciate everything that's been shared today to help me really examine my own biases as well and where I don't have the understanding.
Yeah, and I'm speaking more as an autistic, lesbian, transgender woman. Don't try to say that 3 times fast. But you do need a lot of diversity, because there is not one unique shared experience of being a woman. My experience as being trans, being autistic, and being lesbian is going to be very different from Eva's experience as a woman of color. We don't have the same lenses, but we need to have a variety of lenses in order to get a full picture. And so you really need to develop your ERGs, your employee resource groups. You need to talk to the people in your organization, talk to many different people in your organization, and try to find many different people. All right?
Well said.
Yep.
Thank you.
I love that. I was just going to add, from my perspective, I think it's really hard. And we're a smaller company as well. And I even find it challenging as kind of like a white male on a topic like this to figure out like what is the right level at which to engage. And coming out, I speak often, but I would say I'm never as nervous speaking about a topic, even to 10x the audience, than I would be on a day like today. But I think fighting through that is really important. One of the things that got me personally passionate about this topic is, before this startup, I was at Facebook for 6 years. And one of the most profound experiences that I had when I was there was I was invited as one of the senior male leaders to the Women's Day that Cheryl runs within the business. And I wasn't given a lot of prep. She said, this is a session and we're going to run on allies. You just need to be in the audience. You don't need to talk about it. And I showed up and I walked into a room and there was 2,500 women in a room. And it was the first time in my life, I believe, that I was a true minority in a room. And it was funny to see what it did to me that I understood academically before, but I got to experience for the first time. All of a sudden, I lost my confidence. I didn't know if I should sit down or stand up. I started thinking about whether the women in the room that were on my team would think that I'm ruining their day by being there. And actually, one of the woman that had my team that was closest to me came up to me afterwards, and she said, "You don't look like yourself at all. Like, you've lost all your like, who are you?" But I thought it was helpful for me, and the reason why I bring it up is I think this concept of like externships, like trying to put yourself, I thought the presentation before was amazing when it says like, ask your CEO why he or she cares about these issues. I think it would be great for more CEOs to have that experience, to come out to situations like this where you are uncomfortable, where you don't control your surroundings, where all these things like inner voice and imposter syndrome and vulnerability hit you in a way that you can feel, as opposed to a way that you can read but will never truly experience, which is why I'm here today. And some of the things that we've been trying to incorporate into our company, which is we want to get people that feel it the least out into situations where they are forced to feel it as opposed to understand it, and then we feel like the passion follows the empathy.
So thank you for that. Some good role modeling around allyship and your learning journey. And I really appreciate that everyone has been so intentional about really talking about intersectionality and just how critical it is to this conversation, right? Too often when we talk about women, we think women are some homogenous group, and obviously there's so much complexity around all of this. So thank you. So my second question, and I'd love to start with Anisha again, if you could ground us again. what do we know about measurement? Like, how can you actually, measure your retention efforts? Like, how do you know what's working?
Yeah. So I think some of the work behind behavioral design is really focusing on setting norms in organizations too, and measuring those norms and seeing what works best. Something that I think is really interesting is a project we're doing with a big company in terms of their promotion rates. So what we're doing is we're giving each of the managers information about their track record of how they're hiring women versus men. So it's called a gender promotion ratio. And what the researchers are really doing are focusing on whether giving managers that information will actually nudge them to change their future promotions and actually increase the number of women in promotions. So we're still collecting data on it, and there's some before and after data, but I think it's a really interesting indication of a measurement that also is a nudge, right? So you're giving people this data, and this data that you're measuring in terms of how many women are going to be in women in senior leadership positions at your organization, but also giving people information on their own gender bias. So they're actually not, so we're setting a norm that, like, for example, if someone, so the ratio is basically if you have a number of 1, for example, you're promoting men and women equally. So if we're giving information to managers that is saying, all your peers have a gender promotion ratio of 1, yours is 0.2. Does that nudge people to change, or does it not? So we're still collecting data on that, and the faculty are working really hard at figuring out whether this works. But in terms of our before and after data, I think there is some evidence that that does work. So a way in which we can use measurement and measure retention to also nudge change.
Thank you for doing this research so that practitioners can really, be able to share this.
Do that research in your company, come talk to me and test it. I would love to do that.
Yes, this is the woman here to talk to. So how about everyone else? I know everyone's sort of at different stages of this process, but have you thought about measurement around retention or seen anything that sort of worked or not?
So I can start. Again, we're a relatively small company. I think for us, like, if we were just to measure retention, the numbers would be relatively small, but it's also like way too late. So one of the things that we've started doing is measure employee engagement and measure different aspects of employee engagement. We do that on a weekly basis, and I think hopefully that gives us some data and some insight in order to act on things that people are feeling. It's anonymous, so people can share if they maybe don't feel comfortable going to their manager. Any feedback that goes directly to our management team, and those are read regularly. So I think that's one aspect that's been really helpful for us to sort of gauge how people are feeling and get a pulse, hopefully before someone feels they need to leave the company.
Yeah, I know from my standpoint, I was inspired by the Salesforce presentation this morning, because in the spirit of transparency, and Mike alluded to it earlier when he talked about the Move the Dial report, that organizations were not willing to come forth with the current status. And that's probably for good reason, because they're embarrassed about their numbers, or they don't know their numbers, and they don't want to be that company that is seen as not being there yet. But I would say from Ceridian's standpoint, we are aware of our numbers, we are measuring, but I think what we have to do a better job at is being more transparent and publishing those numbers. I know, just based on the work I've done the last year, 59% of our US workforce are women, 53% of our Canadian workforce is women, but I don't know how many people within our employee population are aware of those numbers. We do track the number of employees who are promoted based on a number of measurement and a number of different variables that we're interested in. And also, when you look at things like the gender pay gap, and when you think about, 217 years being the estimated time to close that gender pay gap, it's bloody ridiculous that we know that, and I'm not okay with it, and I hope that companies are starting to really track and look at those metrics when it comes to gender pay, as well as a number of other variables, because it's important. We have to take that action to actually move the dial and create that change. So we're measuring a number of different variables. We have it on our company scorecard. We have it on our team scorecards. We are very aware. And there's so many tools out there in the market now that you can use. Even just looking at Glassdoor. How many of you are aware of your Glassdoor score today? So that's something that you can go to right away, tracking your Glassdoor score, implementing the engagement surveys, which is also very important to us. There are so many tools out there that you can tap into, start tracking, but I think that the transparency and the visibility is something that our organization has to work on, and I'm looking forward to helping us getting there.
I honestly don't know Cognizant's metrics, so hint, hint, nudge, nudge, if any Cognizant is watching. But I'm relatively new, so that might be it. But anyways, it is important to have your metrics and your data, but you also need to be able to put into a context. Because while as an engineer, I absolutely love when you can give me numbers, you need to understand what the numbers actually mean. So you need to develop basically a culture of psychological safety and inclusion so that people feel like they can actually speak up and tell you, hey, this policy, it's really horrible and, forgive my language, screws over women. For example, say a leave policy or maternity leave policy in particular. And as I said, you need to have a bunch of different lenses to view this. You can't make a picture out of just one pixel. Okay.
I think that's a great quotable, tweetable right there, Zoe. Yeah.
Thank you.
Over to you, Steve.
Yeah, over to me.
Watch what you say.
Thank you. This is really helping my confidence in this.
See you in the back. 5 minutes.
It's been interesting. There's actually like 2 parts to this that, so we've got an inclusion and diversity group inside of our company. We did that from the beginning. Actually, I think Megan and Shuru from that crew are here today somewhere. Yes. And we struggle with this one. This is, we've kind of gone back and forth on it. We are starting to measure, because I think you've got to measure something. Like, you don't move anything if you don't measure it. But we kind of talk a lot about like rule of law, spirit of law. And sometimes it's difficult to capture the spirit of what you're trying to accomplish in the rule of law. Sometimes that's because you shouldn't be measuring it in a particular way. Sometimes that's because all the intersectionality things that we're talking about, you generally stereotype in a different way, which might be a little bit better, but probably not what we're all going for in the spirit. One of the things we've talked a lot about recently, because I don't think I can add a ton on silver bullet for metrics. One of the things we have talked a lot about recently in terms of expectation setting for people, which I think has been helpful, is how you judge what good looks like in terms of progress in a more diverse company. And the interesting thing that might be counterintuitive, I think, for a lot of people is as you move from a more homogeneous group to a more heterogeneous group, you disagree more with people. Meetings aren't the meetings where everybody completes your sentences, pats you on the back, high fives you on the way out and says like, why did we even do this? You're the best. We always see eye to eye. Yeah. And it sounds funny, but I actually find it's very discouraging for people because you think you're doing better, but everything inside of you feels worse because you have these meetings where you leave and you're like, I feel like all I got was different perspectives. I feel like nobody sees things the way that I see things. And so what we've been trying to do internally is we've said, that's a great thing. When you leave a meeting where somebody is everybody is challenging you, nobody naturally sees things the way that you see things, you should leave that meeting and be like, this is the best meeting we had this week. But everything inside of you has been taught that you should conform, and that's the worst meeting in that week. The best meeting is the one where you all agreed. And so what we've been trying to focus on is to say, as we're getting the metrics right, and I don't think we've got them right, we are measuring things, they're probably not the right things, so I don't even want to talk about what we're doing yet. But we are talking a lot about the spirit and intent behind what we're doing, and we're giving everybody a voice to be able to participate if that spirit is finding its way into kind of like the rule of law.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, and I'd also say that I'd have to agree with you that if you're in a room where everyone agrees with you, then you're probably in the wrong room. Hopefully that doesn't mean you're in the wrong room today. And also you really should be getting your data. You should be also standing by your data. For example, you should take, if you're a corporation in the United States, you should take HRC's Corporate Equality Index, and you should actually show that number. because that number actually means something and actually tells people, can I trust you not to be horrible to your queer employees? So anyways.
Anyone else have any other pieces to add, or we're good? So just a final question. So, I mean, this retention piece, and I think, as you've really alluded to, it's so unique, right? We all feel differently on any given day within an organization. We all have such different needs. What does it look like for you to belong within your organization? Like, what does that look like? You know, a small example from a day, or what does that feel like? Is anyone comfortable sharing?
Oh, it's a loaded question. I mean, at its very simplest form, I think it's an organization and a job that you really enjoy and are passionate and committed to is just the job where you can be yourself and where you are enabled to be yourself and be successful both in and out of the workplace, wherever that may be. So for me, it's very, very simple. It's working for an organization that recognizes who I am, not only in the workplace, but also at home, and the commitments I have at home. And in the cocktail reception last night, we were sharing stories about how important it is to really understand who you work with as well. And when I look at my employees and my team, I look at them as not only a team member, but who is their team at home and who is their family and what does that situation look like? And it might not necessarily be the same as mine. And then I try and do things that really enable them to be successful at everything that they do. So I'll just use a very simple tactical example. We have our user conference every year, and it requires people to be away from their families for 7 nights at a time, which is a lot of travel time, and it's concurrent, so it's even harder. It makes things at home for your family very, very hard to handle. So we got into a room for half an hour, and I provided just cards, and I said, I want you to take half an hour to write a card, and I did pick people who had children at home. I want you to write a card to each of your children every night and label it, night 1 through 7, and every night when they go to bed, they can read a message from their mom, from their dad, and it will just make life easier at home. I know because I've done this year over year, and I know how grateful my husband is at home, that I'm thinking about them while I'm away, and my children has just changed their reaction to supporting me in my job and being okay with the fact that I am a working professional and I do have something else going on in my life. It just makes it supportive, and we did that this year as a team, just recognizing there's other people in this situation. So what are the small things you can do to help make them be successful both in and out of work?
I would say that basically an organization where I can feel, where I don't have to think about, oh, do I have to keep this part of myself hidden? Do I have to play the pronoun game about my partner that, oh, my partner did XYZ instead of, yeah, my girlfriend Jackie did ABC and it was absolutely hilarious. And not having to think through, do I keep it a secret that I'm trans and keep it a secret that I'm autistic? Is it going to be held against me if I come out? I don't want to have to think about such things. I want to be able to think about the task at hand without any of those annoying little distractions. Yeah?
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll turn it around because I do feel like, you know, I'm the founder, so I do feel pretty comfortable going into work. But one thing happened this week where we had a couple employees challenge in a meeting not only their boss, but their boss's boss and me in terms of how we handle the situation. And I think even though that was like a super uncomfortable situation where it's like I felt terrible, I feel like I should have had more empathy, I should have dealt with that better, I do think that it is an example of someone feeling that they could belong if they felt comfortable in a group meeting challenging a number of people who are more senior than themselves. So
Yeah, that's great.
We do one thing that might be practically helpful for folks. We do these vision sessions where basically you pretend that it's the end of next year and you've had the best year of your life, not the best year of your career, but the best year of your life inside and outside of work, and you write down what happened. And you share it with the team that as much as you're comfortable with, but we encourage everybody to be as vulnerable as possible. And that way everybody understands, both like professionally, personally, in the community, what amazing looks like for you. And then you have to go below and you have to say, these are the ones that I think I'm going to be really good at, and this is where I need help and how you can help me inside of the company. And I think it gives a lot of permission for people to then go and say, hey, you told me you're going to be, at the gym every day, and that's really important for you to feel really good. Like, you've been hanging out here all night and eating Cheetos. Like, this doesn't feel consistent with your vision. And to be able to do that in a way that, like, they've asked for it, as opposed to you're being a jerk, and the goal of that is to try to create this sense of belonging, that you can bring your true self to work, and that work helps you be your true self and accomplish your goals outside of work, as opposed to you look back and you say, best 3, 4, 5 years of my career, but I had to sacrifice everything else to accomplish it. We always try to think of, like, we're running a marathon. We don't need to sprint the whole way. So we need people to live great lives, not just have great careers.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you, everyone. So it looks like we have a lot of work to go, but I'm really appreciative that everyone is so sort of forthcoming, about where you're at and on your journey. And so thank you.
Great. Thank you.